Well, good morning. And welcome. We have a wonderful crowd here this morning. Some folks from off campus, so it's a particular pleasure to welcome you all to Agnes Scott. My name is Elizabeth Quiche. I have the best job in the world, which is to be the president of this extraordinary college, which educates women to think deeply, live honorably, and engage the intellectual and social challenges of their time. Agnes Scott is in the process of launching a very exciting strategic initiative called Summit, which will enable every single student, regardless of her major, to have a robust experience around global learning and leadership development. And it will fully launch next fall. But part of Summit is this initiative called LeaderStories, where we are bringing to our campus extraordinary leaders from all walks of life, women who are truly making a difference in leadership across societal sectors and around the world. And so it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome Dr. Vandana Shiva to Agnes Scott College as part of our Leader Stories series, and also in a program that is supported here at Agnes Scott by the Nell Chamley Howard Fund. Dr. Shiva's visit to Atlanta is made possible by one of the great sustainability champion families in the world, and one of a great friend to sustainability here at Agnes Scott. And I do want to give a special word of thanks and welcome to Laura Turner Seidel and her sister Jenny Garlington. It was Laura's idea to bring Dr. Shiva to Atlanta. And we want to salute you and thank you for your support that made this visit possible. Laura is somebody through the Turner Foundation, as well as through your own Captain Planet Foundation, is doing wonderful work around sustainability. So let's give Laura and Jenny a round of applause as well. Thank you. Just one more quick thing about Agnes Scott, particularly for those of you who are here on our campus for the first time, and it's relevant to the theme of our distinguished speaker today. You are sitting in a building that was just recycled. It was reopened just 2 months ago. It was built in 1951, had been empty for the past 10 years, was reopened as an innovative living and learning community, including this wonderful auditorium that we affectionately called the Franny, the Francis Bailey Graves Auditorium. This is a geothermal building. It is sustainably heated and cooled with geothermal wells out on the Chapel Quad, 45, 450-foot deep wells that sustainably heat and cool this building. And in fact, just want to let you know, your body heat right now, as part of this morning's event, is being captured by our geothermal system, because it's part of how geothermal energy works. And so we are anticipating that this building will receive LEED Gold certification, and it's part of an overarching effort here at the college to engage the intellectual and social challenges of our times, to live honorably by living sustainably. I want to also thank the individual at Agnes Scott who really made this possible, and that is our fabulous Director of Sustainability, my favorite co-conspirator on all things green, the great Susan Kidd. And now it's my great pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Vandana Shiva. You know, we love to honor trailblazing leaders here at Agnes Scott. We love to educate and inspire our students to become trailblazing leaders. Dr. Shiva is a trailblazer in so many ways. She was a trailblazer as a physics PhD student from India, one of the very first, as I understand it, women to receive a PhD in physics. And she went on from that scientific foundation to become a true icon of the sustainability movement around the world, and to make an extraordinary difference in agricultural practices, not only in her own country of India, but also around the world. She is a world-renowned environmental leader and thinker, director of the Research Foundation on Science, Technology, and Ecology, and the author of many books, and I know that there are students here who have been reading Dr. Shiva's work. Her books include Staying Alive, Women, Ecology, and Development, Soil, Not Oil, Environmental Justice in an Age of Climate Crisis, Earth, Democracy, Justice, Sustainability, and Peace, Water Wars, Pollution, Profits, and Privatization, Biopiracy, the Plunder of Nature and Knowledge, and Monocultures of the Mind. In 1993, Dr. Shiva won the Alternative Nobel Peace Prize, the Right Livelihood Award, and in 2010, she was awarded the Sydney Peace Prize for her commitment to social justice. The founder of Vandana, which means 9 seeds, a movement promoting diversity and the use of native seeds, she also set up the Research Foundation for Science, Technology, and Ecology. I love this, in her mother's cowshed. Its studies have validated the ecological value of traditional farming and been instrumental in fighting destructive development projects in India. So we welcome this morning to Agnes Scott, a woman who is a distinguished scientist, who is a social entrepreneur, who has changed agricultural practices all around the world, and whose life is profoundly shaped by a commitment to make the world more sustainable and more just. We are honored to welcome Dr. Shiva to Agnes Scott. Please join me in giving her a warm round of applause.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here at Agnes Scott. I was told it started as a school and became a college. And it took me back to my grandfather, who had started a girls' school, the first in the rural areas as part of our having gained freedom, and he recognized that if girls' education was still neglected, we wouldn't be truly free. And the school became very successful. It served a very large area. There was a demand to make it a college. And those were days soon after independence where everyone was a Gandhian. And so he went on a fast to call attention to the request for the school to become a college. And he gave up his life for that girls' college, which exists today. The president came one day too late and made it the college. And it's on those kind of contributions that institutions that we've benefited from in our generations have been built. You are having a whole year on leadership. You've just had an election, which shows one kind of leadership. Get money, win votes. And I don't think that's the kind of leadership that Agnes Scott is training you in. My own work in ecological activism began with a beautiful movement called Chipko. I come from the Himalayan region of India. I was born in Dehradun. I returned there when my mother said, "You want to do work for ecology? Don't worry, give up your job, take the cowshed." And so I took the cowshed, and we still enter at ground level because cows couldn't have climbed steps. So there's no plinth in our office. The Chipko movement started in the early 70s because our forests were being logged. And the women could connect the logging with the landslides, with the droughts, the floods, the scarcity of water, the disappearance of springs, because they understood that forests conserve water. A simple connection that wasn't being made in a reductionist forestry which saw forests as a timber mine. Yeah? Chop down trees, it's that much square foot of timber. And one of the most important actions was in 1977, I remember, where women came out with lanterns during the daytime to protect the forest. And of course, police was there, the officials were there, and they said, "You stupid women, can't you see the sun is out?" And they said, "No, this light is not for the sun, it's for you. Because you're not seeing that the first produce of the forest is soil and water and pure air. It's not timber and revenue." 1978, we had floods. Government was forced to recognize that forests protect soil and water. Now we have climate change discussions. They're being forced to recognize that forest protection is vital to clean air. So here were women who'd never been to school. And I'm telling you this story not just because their actions changed our policies. Forests above 1,000 meters in central Himalaya are now recognized for their conservation contributions, for their ecological functions, not for timber. And their grassroots actions changed our policies. In fact, Chipko became the basis, just like Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, became the basis of the environmental movement and environment protection agency in this country. Chipko, Rachel Carson was a woman, the Chipko women were women. That became the foundation of India's environmental policy and environmental acts. Of course, both here and in India, there's an attempt to undo all that was put in place for environmental protection. I remember at one point when we'd managed to stop mining on the basis of study that was given, assigned to me and this new foundation that had started in my mother's cowshed. The Ministry of Environment asked us to look at mining. And then the mines were shut and we were having a celebration in a village. And the women had done all the actions. But the men were giving all the speeches. So I said to some of the women, I said, "You're the ones who shut the mines down. Why don't you come and speak?" And they said, "Our leadership is doing the action." They think they're being leaders by talking. And that's another time I learned the difference between a leadership of transformation by actually being the change we want to see versus a leadership of either empty talk or even worse, domination. Because patriarchies kind of seep through every institution that governs our lives, whether it be science or the way we define economics or the way we produce food or we govern ourselves. And the common trend of every patriarchal structure and institution is a master. And this has even gone to the level of basic things like seed production and food production, which were literally in the third world till 20 years ago, women's activity and women's expertise. Women have been the seed experts throughout human history in every culture. So women who've gone out into the field, identified the particular plants that give the seed, that has good yield, has good flavor, has pest resistance in a year of drought, has drought resistance, and through their selection over centuries, we have all of the crops that are the basis of our food. It is women's expertise. And I realized this when I started Navdanya, the movement to save seeds. I started Navdanya because because books I'd written, conferences I was invited to in 1987, I realized the old chemical industry wanted to now own the seed through patenting, which means owning through invention and through genetic engineering, which gave them the opportunity. Having worked for decades before that with peasant women, whether it was peasant women of the Himalaya with Chipko, or Orissa, or the coastal areas of Andhra, I was fully aware that women have been the seed savers. And when we started to save seeds, I started to watch more closely. And I'll give you just two little instances. In Karnataka, where I was at research institutions, the Indian Institute of Science and the Indian Institute of Management, for 3 years between 79, when I went back after my PhD, and 82, till I went to my mother's cowshed. In that period, I was in Bangalore. Bangalore today is called the Silicon Valley of India. That's where all the high-tech people are. In that state of Karnataka, they celebrate New Year. The festival is called Ugadi. And 9 days before, women plant 9 seeds in an earthen pot. And on the 9th day, they immerse it in water. But they're watching. They're watching the 9 seeds grow. And if one of them hasn't done well, they'll turn to their neighbor to say, can I have the sesame? My sesame didn't do too well. Or can I have rice? And they do a seed exchange. Now, this is a beautiful New Year ritual of the renewal of life, of the coming of a new year, but it's a scientific test. In tribal areas where rice was domesticated, there are 2 species of rices in the world. One is called the indica varieties, indica species, and the other is the japonica. Indian peasants evolved 200,000 varieties of rice out of one grass called Oryza satayo. I've been to these areas when I started Navdanya because I knew these were the center of rice diversity. And they have amazing ceremonies too. One of them is at the beginning of the agricultural season on a day called Akshaya Tritiya, Akti for short. And everyone brings their seeds. And in a way, it's a reminder that seed is to be shared. And then the women will take 21 seeds, exactly 21, in a piece of cloth, put it into the soil. Take it out in 9 days. According to the germination, they decide their seed rate. 21 seeds, exactly. If 21 do fine, they have a normal seed rate. If 1 fails, they increase it. If 3 fail, they change the seed. If you look at the germination rates of corporate seed, I travel my country, sometimes there's 100% failure. If seed was being put to the test through women's expertise, we wouldn't be leaving seed in Monsanto's hands. They're just too unreliable. Not only are they unreliable, they're greedy. They're greedy to the extent of wanting so much profit from seed that they're allowing farmers to get into debt. And more than 291,000 Indian farmers have committed suicide since 95, when globalization allowed corporate takeover of many sectors in many countries. And 95% of the seed in the cotton sector in India is today owned by Monsanto. And that's why we have started a program called Fibers of Freedom. And we distribute seeds, local seeds. We help farmers remember what it's like to be organic because they used to be organic. We help them produce fabrics. We call it Fibers of Freedom because cotton used to be our fiber of freedom.
Show them.
Show it, yeah.
Yeah, show it.
Okay. So, Gandhi, for independence, Gandhi realized that we were being colonized for textiles. In those days, the British Empire ran on the textile industry, including bringing Africans here to work on the cotton plantations, forcing us to grow indigo so that they could take it, and stopping production in India. I mean, in our history books, we learn that the master weavers who teach others, their thumbs were cut so so they couldn't teach the next generation. So Gandhi pulled out the spinning wheel and said, we will spin our way to freedom. And when he was asked, how on earth can these pieces of wood bring you freedom? Because the idea was you've got to have cannonballs, you know. They have cannonballs, you have cannonballs. You shoot each other to death. And he said, no, this is the only thing that can, because it is so small that it can be in the hands of the last woman who will be a leader of the freedom movement. Very different idea of leadership. So what we do is with the organic cotton, we take it to the old ashrams where Gandhi's hand spinning and hand weaving carries on. And then the women actually do all this hand printing with vegetable dye. Each leaf is individually printed. And not only is this non-violence at every level, from the seed to the cultivation to the making of the cloth, and even because dyeing industry is a very, very toxic industry now. So we are so happy to be able to do this work to celebrate life and celebrate creative work at every level. In fact, our research agency that promotes cotton cultivation, we've had a little change in government, and our last agriculture minister was very close to Monsanto. The new agriculture minister isn't yet. I hope he won't be. But the scientists got their voice to speak. And they've just said, BT cotton, the GMO cotton, has been a disaster for India. And they are recommending that farmers go back to native varieties of cotton. Yay. Now, in the work we've done in these areas where the suicides have been so huge, we do sit and work out on the costs and benefits for farmers. Farmers are earning 5 to 10 times more. Farmers are not just growing equivalent amount of cotton, but they're also growing food, which you need. Most of the suicides are in the cotton area. Every suicide leaves behind a widow. Why do men commit suicide? Because they're the ones who go to the market. And in the market, they have one swig, a little bit of alcohol, play a few cards. The seed agent comes and says, just sign on this paper and take this miracle seed. You're going to get so much yield. The poor man has no idea what he's doing. He's put his thumbprint and gone home. It's only in 2 years' time, when he's in such deep debt that he ends his life, that's when the widow comes to know that they were in debt. That's when the widow comes to know she's lost the land. Anyway, I work with the widows, and we have done 2 things with the widows. One is we've created gardens of hope, because they've lost their land, but they still have to eat. So to make sure they and their children have food, we give them seeds for vegetables. But they're also very talented and skilled. In one of the meetings I was having, they'd served me the most amazing meal with artisanal foods. And I said, this stuff is so good. You have such talent. Why don't you make these products for the market? So not only the cotton, but even food. We help them. Now, there is this very false idea of everything that's highly skilled in the context of life, whether it is seed or food or care. Every one of those skills in the dominant economy is defined as unskilled work. But that's where the high skills are needed. Farming is a very highly skilled work. Gardening is a very highly skilled work. I know you have gardens here. And any one of you who is participating in gardens, I am sure you will admit that reading a text and writing a paper is not as skilled as growing a crop. Yeah? Because saving that seed, growing that seed, tilling the land, making it fertile, taking care of the plant, it involves just so much knowledge. Whereas when you read a book, only one little part of your brain's functioning. And that, in fact, is the tragedy of our times, that we are such a beautiful part of the Earth family. And the Earth family was shrunk to ignore the Native Americans here, to ignore the African Americans, to ignore them in terms of their humanity. Ignore women, they were just chattel, they were just property. So most of humanity, and then of course the whole world as colonies, most of humanity just disappeared from humanity. And the earth disappeared from her creativity. The earth was defined as dead matter. All of science of the mechanistic kind is based on the assumption that nature is dead matter and has no value. And the value comes when you transform it. There's a book in which I have a contribution. We wrote it way back when Ivan Illich was still alive and a big inspiration to many of us. And Ivan said, the word development is very troublesome, so why don't we do a development dictionary? And then each of us was given a different chapter, and because I work on ecology, I was given resources. And I went back to the word, the history of the word resource. Resource means that which resurges, that which renews itself. In contemporary language, resource means that which is raw material and has no value in itself. It's a resource. Something else brings the value. Now, this something else is the problematic part. Because this something else is the elevation of patriarchal institutions to be the creative force of the universe. I call it the creation myth of patriarchy. So let me just give you 2 or 3 examples of how this creation myth is working in our times to create the disasters around the planetary disasters, the food disasters, the human disasters. So if you look at agriculture, the planet has produced plants for such a long time. Human beings have farmed for 10,000 years. And there's so much archaeological work to show that it was women who basically started the domestication of plants and gave us the legacy of agriculture. I don't agree with many of my colleagues who think farming in and of itself destroys the earth, because you can farm with the earth. And most sustainable cultures have not destroyed the soil. They haven't destroyed their biodiversity. So they have thrived for 10,000 years. India is one of those examples. When the British sent a scientist called Albert Howard to India, and Albert Howard was sent to improve Indian agriculture. We always need improvement, yeah? Not good enough. And he arrived, and he found there were no pests in the fields. He found the soils were very fertile. So he said, I threw away my spray guns and decided to make the pests and the peasants my teachers. And he studied. As a good scientist, he studied. He wrote a book called the Agricultural Testament. It is called the Bible of Modern Organic Farming. But it came from learning from nature. It came from learning from the peasant. And in that, he put down the principles of what's sustainable agriculture. And he says farming in countries like India, in those days, they didn't, the way it wasn't north and south, it was Orient and Occident. Yeah? That in the Orient, people have learned to farm with nature. And therefore, agriculture is as perennial as the forest and the ocean and the prairie. So you can work with the earth. Suddenly, we get something called the Green Revolution in the 60s. And the story now becomes, without chemicals, you can't grow food. One of the most violent stories of our times, and I got involved in agriculture because of the violence in India in '84, the disaster of Bhopal, the leak of a pesticide plant. and the violence in Punjab. I studied the Green Revolution and started to realize that violence in society and violence to the earth have a connection. That violence to the earth and violence against women has a connection. In fact, during my field trips to Punjab, I'd started to see billboards on sex selection. My sister's a medical doctor, is on the government committee that drafted the law to prevent what is called female feticide, selecting the female fetus and aborting it. And she's written the laws, and she had all these maps, she had all the government data, and one day we are sitting at home, and she has a map of female feticide, and I have my maps of chemical agriculture and green revolution. They're the same map. And the links are this, that chemicals displace women from agriculture. And women who are at the center of agriculture are now perceived as a disposable sex. In the process, patriarchy combines with new techniques, the techniques of sex selection. It's saying we don't need women. And there are villages in Punjab and Haryana where there are no girls being born. The female ratio has dropped to 850 in some places. And the richer the area, the more the female feticide. So the thesis that, you come out of poverty, you get rich, you're suddenly going to be far more respectful of women, the opposite is true. The data on Delhi shows that South Delhi, which is the rich part of Delhi, has higher rates of female feticide. And then you've got the violence within society, because it's a system that constantly needs more and more inputs. You get into deeper and deeper debt. And you were made a promise of prosperity, which is what the Green Revolution story was, prosperity and peace. But you don't have prosperity, you have debt. That's why the young men of Punjab took to guns and started throwing bombs. Exactly like the militias in Oklahoma. So violence in society that we are seeing grow so intensely is very much linked to the violent ways in which we are producing our food. What happened to Punjab is exactly what's happening to Syria. In Punjab, the farmers were saying, we aren't making a living. They weren't listened to, they weren't listened to, they weren't listened to, the army was sent. And then the vicious cycle grew. Army was sent, Indira Gandhi was assassinated, more Sikhs were killed, and it carries on. In Syria, 2009, they had a massive drought. $800,000 people around the town of Dara were displaced. 75% of food production was wiped out, 85% of the livestock. That kind of displacement will destabilize any society. And because we have globalization and an obligation of governments to actually not do anything for agriculture and their peasants, to engage in free trade and trade liberalization, Assad neglected the agricultural demands of the peasantry and did not give them relief. Instead, he threw them into jail. That's how the rebellion against Assad started. It was linked to the way we do agriculture. It was linked to climate change and drought. But are we addressing those foundational issues? No. We deny the root causes, then we criminalize victims of a non-sustainable process, and the vicious cycle of violence keeps growing. Not in Punjab and not in Syria has violence stopped the violence. That kind of leadership through a militarized mind is putting us to the brink. And that militarized mind is not just in actually sending warplanes to bomb. the militarized mind has entered the way we relate to the seed and food. Now, I've spent a lot of time looking at genetically engineered organisms. And the way a gene is introduced to a plant to which it doesn't belong is through the use of a gene gun. Yeah? They call it a gene gun. They shoot a gene on a gold particle to enter a plant. But when you shoot like that, it's blind. It's just like the bombings of Syria are blind bombings. You don't know what you're doing. The shooting at the genetic level is a blind technology. There's no knowledge about what's going on at that level. Look at pesticides. Do the spraying of pesticides and poisons which have caused so much harm to species and our health, all of the cancer epidemics we see. Every second person I know has a family member with cancer in India now. We've done a book called Poisons in Our Food because we realize it's getting so bad. And yet it's not in the newspapers. We were talking about the cancer epidemics in this country. And they're totally linked to toxics. Do those who create pesticides know how pests are controlled in the field? They don't. They know how to kill. And leadership in knowledge that comes through the idea of leadership in killing is very different from the idea of leadership through maintaining the web of life. And that's the leadership you need to cultivate, whether it's through your knowledge or your practices. In a field, our farm in Dehradun, which is a teaching farm, and I hope at some point students of this college will be able to make a trip. What we've basically done is saved seeds, created a sanctuary for diversity, grown crops without chemicals, and the rest nature does for us. We didn't go and put ladybird beetles on the wheat plants. They come on their own. We did not put the mycorrhizal fungi in the soil. It grows on its own. We did not put the butterflies. We grew the crops to which the butterflies come. We are doing a study right now, and the indicators are that the farm where we are conserving biodiversity has 6 times more more pollinators than the forest next door. And of course, way beyond the chemical farms which have no pollinators. There are no pollinators in chemical fields because pesticides kill blindly. They don't differentiate between beneficial insects and the one insect that might be becoming a pest. And because it's a technology based on ignorance, the more you use it, the more pests you create. You create more pests because the one pest that you were targeting has become resistant, and the friendly insects which have contained that pest have been killed. You kill spiders, you kill ladybird beetles, you're killing the pest control agents. But a paradigm based on blindness to life can't see the functions. That's why women's leadership as practitioners of agriculture who have a knowledge, not from a textbook, but from having farmed and having transmitted this knowledge generation to generation to generation. So on the one hand, we've got this toxic assault on the planet, which is destroying both life on earth and our health. And that's a basic issue, that the earth and our bodies can't be separated. The quality of the air we breathe decides our health. The quality of the food we eat decides our health. In India, the problem of water is so big now. Every time I take a sip of water, I think of all the women who are walking miles and miles and miles to get a little bit of fresh water. I mean, I know we are in the capital of Coca-Cola. You know, women of Plachimada walked 10 miles to get clean water because of a plant. And then they decided they were going to shut the plant, and they asked me to come help. And they shut down a Coca-Cola plant. All around access to clean water. Now, in the area of food, let's look at what the industrial system is doing both to our health as well as to the planet's health. As far as the planet's health is concerned, 75% of all ecological destruction is taking place because of industrial farming, which is done on 25% of the land, on 75% of the land. 25% of the land cultivated is in the hands of small farmers. They produce 70% of the food. So a huge resource grab with huge footprints, 75% biodiversity gone because of industrial farming. Both monocultures that displace diversity of plants as well as the use of toxics. Monarch butterfly, only 10% left. 25% bees left in large areas. We are talking about, this book, I'm reading a book on this journey just now called The Sixth Extinction, totally man-made. One reason we are not looking is because we've been made blind to diversity. And when we don't notice diversity, we don't see its disappearance. When we don't know that there are 7,000 species of frogs, how do we even know that some went? And the first chapter of this book is about how, you know, these frog legs were a high-end food. And frogs were being imported from all over, and in fact, American frogs were being sent out to then be bred and bring back. And it's that movement of globalized trade in food that spread a fungus that is killing the frogs. And we haven't even taken stock of what globalization has done in terms of new disease epidemics on the planet. But we know 75% water is wasted in an agriculture that literally is wasting the water. Plants need water, but they don't need intensive irrigation. Chemicals need intensive irrigation. And since our agriculture is focused on chemicals and not on plant life and not on our food, we're blowing up water, including in the desert. Soil degradation, same thing. You pump chemicals, you're going to have dead soils. You do monocultures, you're going to have exposure to the sun and the wind. You have more erosion. You aren't going to, in the future, you are having a global dust bowl spread right now. That's why there are treaties on land degradation. There's a United Nations treaty to avoid desertification and land degradation. It's treated like an orphan treaty, but it should be the most important treaty. And next year is the year of soil. And it'd be wonderful if your college can join the issue of seed and food and soil to create many activities. In the area of climate change, 40% of the emissions come from, greenhouse gas emissions come from industrial agriculture. And my book, Soil Not Oil, has worked through this. Now, in each of these 4 areas of ecological destruction, biodiverse ecological farming is the solution. You grow biodiversity, of course, you reverse biodiversity erosion. You grow biodiversity, you rejuvenate the soil. You grow biodiversity, you reduce water use. 70% less water use on our farm to produce the same amount of food. If the soil has enough organic matter and it has enough cover crops, it becomes the single biggest water reservoir on the planet. In terms of carbon, if you recycle living carbon, which is what organic farming is, you are actually bringing back into the earth where carbon belongs, out of the atmosphere. And there are now figures all over that we could actually, we have to transit out of fossil fuels, but simultaneously all of that carbon that's up in the air because of 200 years of fossil fuel addiction, we don't have to be hopeless about it. Because the earth and our intelligence has answers. And those answers have now been proven. They aren't something you're imagining for the future. Every tiny garden that is organic is a climate solution. A question was asked yesterday by, I was at MREO, but what about climate change? How will we deal with it without genetic engineering? We can't deal with it with genetic engineering. We can't deal with it with geoengineering, which is another idea that we messed up the planet, so let's mess it up more. The idea of geoengineering is we now have climate change, and there's this reductionist way of talking about climate change as global warming alone, not in terms of climate extremes and climate chaos. So we have global warming, let's have global cooling. President Bush's favorite was to put reflectors in the sky to tell the sun to go back. But the sun isn't the problem, yeah? It's pollution that's a problem. Creating artificial volcanoes. So there's all these particles that will block the sunlight. And there's actually experiments going on of taking planes and throwing pollutants into the atmosphere, so that with those pollutants you're going to have a blockage of the sun. But the sun isn't the problem. I've had some debates with some of these geoengineers on TV debates, and I said, okay, you're saying that let's block the sunshine and we'll have a temperature cooling. And how will the plants do the photosynthesis without the sunshine? That's not in my project. That's the problem. There's too much. There's not in the project. And that's why the leadership we need is widening our projects to be inclusive of all life, of every person. So the patriarchal model of leadership has been monocultures, uniformity, domination, militarization. Every time you see someone with discontent, throw them into jail. Every time you see dissent, declare they're a terrorist. And create a bigger and bigger and bigger militarized machinery to deal with this fear of terrorism, just like there's been the fear of insects in the field, Exterminate, spray to death. Extermination has become the mindset of a leadership that is out of touch with life. The leadership we need, which you need to cultivate, is a leadership with the deep awareness that we are members of an earth community. That's why I talk of earth democracy. Earth democracy is the democracy we have to practice. And earth democracy means recognizing the rights of all species and the rights of the earth, but in the process also recognizing our rights. Our rights as women, our rights as minorities, our rights as every excluded other. And I really feel that it's from those other diversities and their leadership that we are going to have a healing of the planet and the healing of society. In terms of monoculture, it's monoculture of the mind. I mean, Hitler had to exterminate the Jews, the Catholics, the Unionists, because for him, he had put himself up on a privilege. Yeah? There was one pure race. And that attitude of the monoculture is what is allowing the destruction of the planet's life and allowing the intolerances and conflicts within human society. For both, diversity is the answer. Now, leadership in diversity is of a very different kind from a militarized monoculture leadership, because leadership in a militarized monoculture is based on violence. Leadership in diversity is based on interconnectedness, relationship, solidarity. It's based on empowerment of the other. It is based on respect of the other. And that's the place where we are going to get equality, not through imposing sameness, but through the flowering of difference with equal respect. And as we do this more and more in our everyday actions, whether it's how we grow our food or how we cultivate community, we sow not just seeds of peace, we sow seeds of prosperity, of real well-being for all life on earth and all human life. Thank you.